welcome back. I hope you're enjoying your time. And we're going to have another talk, surprisingly. We have the chief rocket scientist, a Ruby hacker and speaker at conferences, and seemingly a JVM convert, judging from his blog post that he wrote about how the JVM is not really that heavy. And he has a publicly documented track record of being a skilled slackliner. So here we have, from South Africa, Kenneth Kalmer.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. I take it by that gasp, a lot of people read that JVM is not so heavy blog post. I hope something else becomes my claim to fame in time. Right, so this talk is more intended for non-Clojure audiences, so some of the stuff will be a bit light touch. I apologize for that, but I still think it's a good idea to, this is part of my journey of teaching people Clojure, and ClojureScript specifically. I think it's an easier ramp on for people to get into the ideas, to really be productive, and to get going. So just to help me get a feel for the audience, how many of you have used Reframe? Many. And deployed it in production? Still many. Okay, so for those who haven't, I'm hoping to give you like a nice overview of why Reframe exists and then like a few things what you can do with it. For those that have, try and use this structure if you go out and tell people about it. It's been my experience over the last 2 years that going through this journey, and we saw this morning already with some of the talks, how difficult it is to teach people these ideas, or any programming ideas in general. And this is quite a jump if somebody's doing Ember or Angular or just raw React. So we've got to like help them along on this journey, and that's kind of the main goal. So who am I? So I'm Kenneth. I've been a Clojure developer for 2 years, full-time, luckily. The chief rocket scientist is a joke. It's as it goes with startups. It just means I'm the lead developer at a company whose logo is a rocket ship. We help businesses increase their valuation, make them more, and we'll use the valuation as a metric for them to grow their businesses and do all kinds of other optimizations. I help with a podcast in South Africa that we talk to the local community. I'm Kenneth Kalmer everywhere online. And there's my blog and about me to help out with this. So how did we get here? In building web apps is hard. I've been building websites for 20 years. I've seen it gone through a lot of craziness. jQuery and shoving your state all over the place in the DOM. We've got no idea what's going on anymore. I'm sure that's happened to most people. Then we went through this great phase of Backbone, Knockout, Batman, who knows what else, where there was about a new framework by lunchtime every day. But all these also wrestled with the same problem, like building any kind of single-page app is really hard. Things started settling and formalizing a bit with Angular and Ember, but it's still, I mean, it's a mutable world out there. It gets absolutely crazy. But then we've started seeing what the future of single-page apps could look like, and it started manifesting in many different ways. So we started seeing immutable JS come up to formalize some of the ideas, to help people out with it. We've seen the functional programming ideas surface, but in a world in a browser where it doesn't always match. So it becomes either really hard to get it done right, or it actually relies more on your discipline as a developer than the tools allow you. People have been wrestling with this. The reactive interfaces and data sources, React itself starting to come up. Other than this, we started having these different demands of like the tree shaking and dead code elimination. I guess it's important if you're just pulling in a bunch of stuff into your app to make sure that things work reliably, and the payloads and stuff you ship to your clients is actually as small as possible. And maybe not so much here in big cities in Europe, but at least like in the southern hemisphere, if you're out in the middle of nowhere on a road, people depend on your stuff to still work. Maybe it's the equivalent if you're on the U-Bahn, you still want something to be able to load when there's no or very little signal in a tunnel. But it's stuff that's really important to think about. So, but we can reframe all this ever so slightly. We can make our lives and the lives of our colleagues a lot easier if we have less mutable state. I'm sure everybody here understands that already, clearly. If we can have less points of synchronization, so when we do manage state, that it's simpler to deal and work with. Again, the smallest possible payloads, fastest possible delivery, and kind of like really important, inoculate against the effects of time. That's something for me that was big coming into Clojures, to start thinking of time in like a proper thing, not as a side effect, and to think how things happen over time, which is surprisingly refreshing. So Reframe, as most of you already know, it's just a framework. I guess it's one of the more truer frameworks in the Clojure world. Most of the other frameworks seems to either be templates like Luminous or a few other pieces assembling of just bigger libraries where, in my experience, Reframe sits quite like in the Risk kind of way where you write inside what Reframe gives you, as opposed to tying a bunch of loose stuff together, but still works really, really nice. And it's written in ClojureScript, which I'm sure everybody knows, and it's written in Clojure, which we all love, so I'm skipping over that. I absolutely love this slide. It's also bizarre to see if you try and tell people that we're using a language and ideas that will be 60 years old this year. That's quite crazy, but it's absolutely great. So, impressively buzzword compliant. If you've checked out the README for Reframe, it's absolutely crazy. But it's interesting to see how some of these ideas have persisted for quite a while. They've been around, and in other languages, or other ideas are starting to come up with Flux. It's also been around a while where we, like Mike and them, had quite a good handle on things, and then distilled it down to something nice, which is absolutely great. And then for those, I've never played with it, but React Native is also quite a possibility. I don't know if, I'm not an app developer. I think our times would be best spent with web apps, unless you really have something that sits in an app. And now with the service workers breaking into mobile Safari, I think the native stuff can start falling away. Well, for the most part. So Reframe follows this never-ending event loop. They like explaining it. This was one of in the README, they had this slide some time ago. I enjoy it. They also explained it as falling dominoes, but I mean, the perpetual loop kind of makes sense. It's a really nice way of thinking through stuff. I'm not going to spend too much time on there. So our apps need data. And that's kind of like going back to the slide where I said, like, where we came from. It's always been the problem. How do we handle this? So you've got the mutation is one problem, but also where you're storing this stuff, if you start tacking it into the DOM, becomes absolutely crazy. So Reframe sets up everything in a single atom. That's your starting point. You can swap out the Reframe atom for DataScript or anything else if you want. I guess as long as it's an observable value that Reframe itself can observe to help the almost the water cycle or the dominoes keep falling over. But for a starting point, a single giant atom is actually fairly sufficient. So in our slides, we're going to be using that giant atom. That's our starting point. So it's that simple. It's just a Clojure map, which is absolutely fantastic. Nothing else to learn. So subscribing into that atom, I mean, we kind of want values. That's kind of the point. We want to be able to render it out and work with it. So in Reframe, it's subscriptions. It's just a little function handler, so it's named. Count as our name in this case. And that function gets called with the database value. It's already at that stage dereferenced for us, so it makes it nice and simple. And we simply plug the value out and we go. Very trivial example. But they can have dependencies. And this becomes really nice. So in this case, that one would be a pain to use, but at least it's clearly named. You can stack these up with as many chains of dependencies as you want. And as the values change and flow through the system, you'll always get what you expect. And it all stays tiny little functions. I mean, this is very terse for demo purposes, but you can easily just extract that anonymous function out and make it a proper function. Makes it way easier to test. You can just put most of the stuff in CLJC files. If you look at our Reframe itself, is actually written other than the DOM parts. But this, if you've got a big app, this stuff becomes critical. This is probably one of its best features in my opinion. If we want to update the state, we need event handlers. So Reframe ships with two kind of event handlers. One's for just updating the DB, which is just like a sugar over a more complex effects handler, which I'm not going to show. You can go check that out in the README. But it's really, again, it's as simple as getting a database value and doing something with it. And this small example, I left out the values. I just wanted to show how it would tick over. But if you assume like if somebody's filling in a form and you want to start capturing values, you'll have more arguments to your anonymous function, form elements or whatever, so you can start extracting values. Then interceptors are quite a useful idea. These help for whenever you're making changes to the world and you want to start doing a few things before or after the changes to help you stay sane. The simplest example is if you're in debug mode, so development mode in normal ClojureScript, to just debug the changes. The reframe debug interceptor is fantastic. It simply prints out the diff of the database, that single giant atom, before and after your event handler got applied. So you can get a quick grasp on what's changing as you go through the system. And then when you compile with advanced optimizations on, that disappears, and you're not logging up all your users' code, consoles with a bunch of rubbish. That's a fantastic way to develop. I'll show another example later of where that becomes really, really useful. But there is tons of stuff that you can do with interceptors. Components, it's dead simple, hiccup maps or functions. And you subscribe and you get an atom out that you can just need to dereference when you need it. It's not particular rocket science. All the extra markup there is just for semantic UI class names. Nest them simply the counter component in the previous one, the functions used in the very last form. Name there is dereference from the other subscription. Becomes very easy to nest these things almost indefinitely. I find it's surprisingly simple how it scales. Sometimes it's noisy if it's just the nature of your app. You've got like a lot of boilerplate to construct some kind of UI, but these things just, it stays dead simple. So now if we want to dispatch an event, we can just use an anonymous function. We can dispatch that event handler we had earlier. Clicking the button will dispatch that as quickly as the system can, and we're off to the races. It's not much there. So the effect handling, I skipped the other slide. It doesn't, or image from the documentation from Reframe, it doesn't sit so well here. But Reframe will simply, when you start dispatching events, it will hook in somewhere in the request animation frame, and it will file for everything as quickly as it can, giving the browser some time to update in between as well. But an important caveat there is, if you, for instance, have a subscription over a value that's time sensitive, like let's just say current time, if there's no interaction with your system from the user, that time will just sit flat with a stagnant value, and you almost need like a different dispatch of just an event to trigger some kind of no-op every, let's say, request animation frame, so you can at least get some kind of feedback. It's like a tiny little nuance. Otherwise, your app will just sit there dead quiet, waiting for users to interact with it. And then for the DOM part, we don't need to worry. I mean, this is all handled for us by Reagent and React. So that makes things fantastically simple for us. So there's the complete counter example, not inside the bigger thing showing how it all hangs together. Dead simple. I mean that in a good way. Like once you've got a handle on it, that's just what you're doing over and over and over again. The hard parts of your system's abstracted away. And then what I kind of wanted to note here is also the importance of routing. This is something when I was using Ember that I realized they had nailed long before anybody else. I mean, we're online. It's the importance of being able to give somebody a URL right into a single page app to get it into the same state that they stored. And this is something, at least early on in Reframe, that's not obvious immediately. And I just wanted to plug that in. But it's, again, it follows. So instead of having an on-click handler that would dispatch an event, this simply hooks into secretary's def root. So whenever it matches, it does nothing other than dispatch a bunch of events that would go and load data and set all kinds of view state so that what the users see is exactly the same what somebody else saw. And then as you navigate through your application, you don't dispatch anything, you change URLs like you would in any normal app, except it doesn't trigger page reloads if your front-end routing is set up properly. This is something, if you're building a single-page app, this is critical from a user experience to get right. So I just want to add that. So that's what does that leave us with? So again, most of you would know this, you're comfortable with this, you've seen this, but it's just really important that for people that sit and battle with, like, does the Webpack work or grunt flows or whatever the new flavor of build tools is, there's a super rich set of tools here to use and to leverage to make developing single-page apps more enjoyable. And it's a REPL that we all love. Hot code reloading that absolutely just works. That's the envy of somebody like people are working with Elm, which looks absolutely fantastic until you show Figwheel. Then the Elm experience is not that hot anymore. We've got source maps with syntax highlighting, which is absolutely great. We're compatible with React Dev Tools, which for me at least just means identifying somewhere in the DOM what the name of my component was. I can quickly hunt it down. And the JS interop story is absolutely fantastic. So a quick little demo. So this was actually the precursor to Murphy's Law. And those of you know Murphy's Law is, I'm not even going to try to do live coding. I'm just going to play a little video. I've failed too many times with this before. So there's going to be a lot going on. If you know this workflow, there's not much else. If you don't, it's quite interesting. There's our component mounted on the side. The bottom part's the Chrome DevTools, which at the time I recorded the video, I couldn't get the font size to increase, so that's pretty small. The code's on the right-hand side, and the open block on the top right is just where I'm going to move Reef Risk into once the video starts playing. So, Reef Risk is just our view into our app state. It's one of the tracing tools. There's many. I believe Saskia is going to give another talk later about the reframe trace, so I'm not going to linger on that. But you can kind of view what's going on in your world, which is important. And then as we start interacting with it, you can just see a bunch of stuff happening. But I mean, that's great to kind of see what happened when and be able to play. So the Redux guys would also come with a time traveler debugging and show off everything and like how amazing this is. And for us, it's dead simple and out the box, which is it's absolutely mind-blowing. So I'm sure you all kind of have a good handle on exactly what just happened there. But it's important to note, like we learned this morning how difficult it is for people to learn and how hard it is for us to teach. So when you start showing this off to somebody who hasn't seen this before, it's quite a lot to take in. And we just kind of need to help them understand. More tooling stuff. We all know the Figwheel errors. Like these things are absolutely great. I didn't put a slide in of the red one when you really screw things up, or when I do. The source maps and debugger in Chrome is absolutely fantastic. The React Dev Tools. Only thing that's really important there is that you can loosely identify your own component in a complex DOM, so you know where to go hunt for when things aren't working the way they're supposed to. So as always, when you bring up the web, the most important question. So it does scale. Again, might be obvious to us, but it's nice taking stock of just exactly what we have. So we've got Clojure's namespaces to keep things isolated. So even when you've got like a bunch of components, subscriptions, event handlers, everything on one side of your app in a folder that you haven't touched in months, they'll probably just keep on working, which is absolutely insane if you actually stop and think about it in a browser-based world. You just add more namespaces as you need. Make sure your events and subscriptions are properly namespaced as well, so that you don't clobber them as you go on. And the reframe tools try and help you in development mode along as well, telling you when it's busy overwriting values. But it also becomes noisy because as you're hot reloading code, it's also overwriting the previous versions of what you had. Figwheel can run for days, even weeks at a time, until Mac needs an update. Everything's just data. Interrupting with the JS libraries is great. I use the semantic UI React stuff. It's fantastic. A little bit of boilerplate here and there, but it works like a charm. But it's important to point out, because we've got access to the whole React ecosystem. Why would we want to go rewrite a gazillion things? Just like on the JVM side, we can tap into the entire Java ecosystem to get stuff. We've got the same here, which is really important. And the NPM integration as well, if you need that. The advanced code compilation stuff is absolutely nuts. Helps for smaller payloads and everything, and being able to split your builds out is also quite useful. For us, if you've got like an admin interface to your project, and you've got the front ends, and you've got one Clojure backend, packaging this all in one project, but being able to split out different artifacts as you build is also fantastically useful. Spec, this is critical if you've got this one giant atom. So in all the little demo examples, I mean, nothing can ever really go wrong. But this is the important part where you can start building up specs to make sure the structure of your system or of your atom is absolutely right. And that is key. And you can hook that in with an interceptor that's kind of set at the bottom. And then this is how you would change it. So earlier I had that interceptor that would just debug and dump out values. This becomes great if you're getting new values in from APIs and you want to update your app state and have it fail when something's wrong. And I found this is probably the biggest way to make this app, any Reframe app, really, really scale well. So Reef Risk is definitely one way to help you keep a handle on your stuff. There's a bunch of ways to trace. Again, Saskia's got a lightning talk, so could definitely check that out. And you can roll your own kind of tracing with the facilities Reframe gives you if none of these other tools work. And you can also think of, if you're now in production, you can have some kind of lightweight tracing that you're only keeping a handle on a few events and changes in the DB as time goes by. And whenever you hit some kind of error, you can always bundle the information and send it off with your error reporting, which is way better than trying to piece together what happened from a record of AJAX request or just simple user interactions. This is you in your own domain. So, if you want to get going, if you haven't already, it's really as simple as starting with the Reframe repo. This project's amazing. I take my hat off to Mike and the team. This is one of the few projects that's probably got more lines of documentation than code. And to actually read the code is dead simple as well. I learned a lot as I started using it. And that's me. Thank you.
That gives us a lot of time for questions.
Yeah.
So here you go. A lot of questions.
Come on.
Okay.
Love the talk. Well, one thing I've run into when using Reframe is that I've had a lot of subscriptions to the point where it just felt super unmanageable. Because again, like from earlier today, naming stuff hard. Do you have any insights on that and like how to make that, or how to make me suck less?
I think that's the naming problem is definitely one thing. I guess it's, do you have too many names or too much code?
It's a lot of moving parts, and I probably could optimize. It's a lot of moving parts, and I probably could optimize with like the linked subscriptions. But yeah, I suspect that there just is so many moving parts, and I feel like this is pretty typical in an SPA. So I don't know, or maybe I'm just sucking. I don't know if you've run into this. But okay. Yeah.
So kind of what I've done is, initially when you start laying out the app, you tend to have a subscriptions namespace and then an events namespace. That's kind of what all the boilerplate and README and samples give you. And that very quickly becomes very unwieldy. What I've tended to do is start having very quickly jump to smaller namespaces that specifically focus along one section of the domain. And like I kind of alluded to it earlier in that just that routing example, but kind of the system we've got at the moment is like all kinds of insights over the stock markets and consumer products and tons of different stuff. And if we'll take like a small piece and go like, okay, there's stock markets. and it's got its own subscriptions namespaced into there, and its own events, keeps it together. Even there, they can become unwieldy. What I've done that I'm not too happy with just yet is I tend to make smaller little functions that just generate the rich subs for me. So I can just basically go like, I want this thing named this way, and it will call out all the rest. But that basically just takes something from 3 lines down to 1. I think it's the chained subscriptions make a big difference. They're also faster because they'll only compute when you've got changes. But I mean, if your app's big, splitting it into the smaller namespaces definitely makes it easier, because then you can open up one file and you've got a few hundred lines to navigate, as opposed to one subscription for everything. That's kind of my best advice. But I kind of hear what you're saying. But if your application grows, it grows, and leaning on more specific namespaces definitely makes it easier. Hope that helps.
Hi. So I've been using Reframe for a while, and what I have trouble with is sometimes maybe one button I wanted to do 4 or 5 different events, and I find it difficult to coordinate between those and give feedback. So my question is, where do you put your logic, and how do you get different events to sort of talk to each other? If it makes sense.
It does make sense. For there, what I would do is, on the button, dispatch a single event. In that event handler, then you can then immediately dispatch a whole bunch of events as a side effect, and you can use the reg event effects. Now the trick is, if you need a dependency between the events, there's a little library called Reframe async flow, where you can kind of define how you want these events to play off, in what order, and it will generate a bunch of temporary event handlers and everything for you, and make sure they chain off together and help you with your error handling. That's definitely one way to tackle it. And I've kind of used that routing example at a load share, and there is 5 or 6 different API calls, and some of them are order dependent, and I use the async flow to help with that.
Does async flow lock up my entire application, or does it provide things?
No, so, that would be the second part. So then it's up to you, as part of dispatching those events, you can then just add a new, a loading value into your DB. And then your interface reacts on that. And you can simply go, you've got a loading spinner. It won't lock up. They all get dispatched asynchronously. Nothing will block it up.
All right, thanks.
One.
So I looked a bit at the documentation for Reframe and how you can, for instance, globally enable subscriptions for some piece of data. Let's say, I think you can do it with regraph, for instance, like globally subscribe to a GraphQL endpoint with a query. Is there some way? I mean, it's very popular in the React world to kind of co-locate your components with GraphQL queries. Is there some way to kind of tie the data sources to the component lifecycle in Reframe, or is it kind of all global and you have to handle subscriptions in events and kind of start and stop subscriptions in response to those?
So it is possible. It doesn't. It becomes unwieldy. So there's a few different things to unpack. The first thing is, on the subscription level, Reframe also gives you the ability to give create what they call a raw subscription. It's a way more lower level construct. And using the dependent queries, you can have a raw subscription. With the raw subscription, you've got the ability to now get notified. Your code will get called as an anonymous function at the subscription time, not so much the value calculation time. And there you can then fire off, for instance, you can connect to a WebSocket, or you can make a specialized call out, any kind of live data thing that you need. And then you'll also get notified when the subscriber is no longer requiring the values, so you can dispose and clean up. But my experience is that's kind of a last resort thing. But it still separates it from your component. So your component ideally should not even know about this. Your component should just say subscribe to a value and give me this. I don't care where it comes from, and simply work with that and render, so like strip the two apart. If you need something more advanced than that, you can hook in with, but then you'll create a normal reagent component with the 3 forms. So you can basically, you've got the whole React lifecycle. But I think you're actually then opening up a world of pain, not not solving a problem. The raw subscriptions are pretty powerful, and in the documentation they've got an example of how you would set that up very loosely without actually going, okay, you're now talking to a WebSocket or something like that. But I mean, I haven't played with the GraphQL stuff. I'm going through that exercise myself of thinking how I would lay that out.
So all the GraphQL questions can you come to
Yes.
the next talk, because that's the next topic on this stage. Thank you again.
Oh, thanks for having me, everyone.
Kind of